We're arriving Friday afternoon. Your father said it's fine. That was the message my stepmother sent at 11:52 p.m. on the very first night I slept in the Malibu beach house I had spent 11 years building toward $5.1 million. Every dollar earned, saved, and invested by me. And before I could even type a response, she followed it with, "Make sure the master is ready. We'll take that. You can use one of the smaller rooms." I didn't react the way most people would expect. I didn't yell. I didn't call her back. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set my phone down on the kitchen counter just to steady them, but I smiled, because in that exact moment, something clicked into place with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. What Diane didn't understand was that her message wasn't just entitled. It was reckless. And the welcome I was about to prepare for her arrival would be something she would remember for the rest of her life. Before I go any further, if you enjoy stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Women Reddit Stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 36 years old, and I live in Malibu, California. But to understand how that message landed the way it did, you need to go back to 2010, the year everything in my family shifted so quietly that I didn't even realize it at the time. My mother died in June of that year. Breast cancer. Diagnosed in February, gone 4 months later. It was fast, clinical, and brutally efficient in the way it dismantled our lives. One day she was planning a weekend trip to Santa Barbara, and the next she was too weak to walk from the bedroom to the living room without help. My father, Richard Caldwell, was a civil engineer who built his entire identity around structure, stability, and predictability. Losing my mother broke something in him that never fully came back together. 2 years later, he remarried Diane Mercer. At first, she was everything you would want a grieving family to find. She was attentive, organized, thoughtful in ways that felt almost rehearsed but still comforting. She brought homemade dinners, remembered birthdays, asked about my college classes, and called me honey with a softness that I mistook for genuine warmth. For a while, it worked. Or at least, it looked like it worked. The shift didn't happen overnight. It never does. It came in small adjustments, the kind that are easy to explain away in the moment. Diane suggested redecorating the house, starting with my mother's reading nook. She said it felt heavy and that a brighter space would help everyone move forward. I remember standing in the doorway watching movers carry out the armchair my mother used every evening, the one with the worn armrest she refused to replace, and I told myself it was just furniture. That letting go was part of healing. Then she suggested I move out of my bedroom. Not immediately, of course. She framed it as a transition. I was 20 years old, finishing my sophomore year at UCLA, and she thought it would be healthier if I started becoming more independent. The room, she explained, would make a perfect home office for her consulting work. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, to push back even slightly, but he just nodded and said, "It might be good for you, Ethan." It wasn't just a room. It was the last place in that house that still felt like it belonged to me. By Thanksgiving of 2012, I noticed something else. The family photos on the hallway wall had been updated. New frames, new arrangements, new memories. In several of them, I simply wasn't there. At first, I assumed it was coincidence, timing, maybe I had been away at school. But then I found one of the older photos in a storage box in the garage, the original version of a picture now hanging in the hallway. In the new version, I had been cropped out. I didn't confront anyone. I told myself it wasn't intentional. That it didn't matter. That I was being sensitive. I paid for my own college after that. Not because anyone explicitly told me I had to, but because the conversations around money changed in subtle ways. Diane would talk about budgeting, about fairness, about how important it was for young adults to earn their independence. Meanwhile, her son, Tyler, from a previous marriage, enrolled in a private university in San Diego with his tuition fully covered by my father. When I asked about the difference, Diane smiled and said, "You've always been more self-sufficient, Ethan. That's something to be proud of." It became her favorite line. I'm not being unfair. I'm being realistic. And for years, I accepted that explanation. What she never realized was that being overlooked gave me something she couldn't measure or control. Privacy. Complete, uninterrupted privacy. While she focused on appearances, on social circles, on positioning herself within the community, I focused on building something that didn't require her approval or even her awareness. After graduating with a degree in finance, I took an entry-level analyst position at a mid-sized investment firm in Los Angeles. The hours were long, the work was demanding, and the expectations were relentless, but I thrived in it. Within 3 years, I was managing client portfolios. Within 6, I was leading a small team. By the time I turned 34, my compensation, including bonuses, had crossed into the mid-6 figures annually. I didn't talk about it at family gatherings. On the rare occasions I was invited, Diane would introduce me to her friends with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Ethan works with numbers," she'd say, before redirecting the conversation to Tyler's latest venture or her own philanthropic events. I let her. It was easier that way. Starting in 2013, I invested aggressively. Index funds, commercial real estate, a pair of duplexes in Long Beach, and eventually a small portfolio of rental properties across Southern California. I lived below my means, drove the same car for nearly a decade, and avoided anything that looked like excess. By early 2025, my net worth had reached just over $5.6 million. No one in my family knew. The Malibu house wasn't an impulse purchase. It was a decision I had been working toward for years, shaped by a memory that never really left me. My mother used to talk about the ocean the way some people talk about a second home. She grew up near Santa Cruz and always said that one day, when life slowed down, she wanted a place where she could hear the waves from the porch. She never got that chance. I found the listing on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in March. 6 bedrooms, modern coastal design, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Pacific, and a wraparound deck that seemed to hover just above the shoreline. Listed at $5.1 million. I ran the numbers, called my attorney, Daniel Reeves, and my lender, and within 3 weeks, the deal was done. I moved in on a Thursday. The first night, I sat alone on the deck with a glass of bourbon, listening to the ocean roll in under a sky that felt impossibly wide. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell Diane. I wasn't trying to hide it, exactly. I just wasn't ready to share something that felt that personal with people who had spent years treating me like an afterthought. But information has a way of traveling through the wrong channels. Tyler saw a photo. A mutual acquaintance posted something online, tagged the location, and within hours, the news reached Diane. And by 11:52 p.m., it reached me. "We're arriving Friday afternoon. Your father said it's fine." I stared at the message again, reading it slowly this time, not for the words themselves, but for what they implied. Not a request. Not even a question. A declaration. An assumption of control. I picked up my phone and called my father. It rang twice before he answered, his voice alert in a way that told me he hadn't been asleep at all. "Ethan? Did you tell Diane she could move into my house?" I asked, keeping my tone as even as possible. There was a pause, brief but unmistakable. "What?" "No. She told me you invited us for the weekend. Said you wanted to celebrate." That was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, irreversible understanding settling into place. "Right," I said. "That makes more sense." I ended the call and stood there in the kitchen, the sound of the ocean filtering through the open doors. The same pattern. The same manipulation. Only this time, the stakes were higher, and the setting was mine. I didn't sleep that night. But unlike other nights in the past, it wasn't because I was anxious or hurt. It was because I was planning. At 7:15 the next morning, I called Daniel Reeves. "Daniel," I said, "I need you to pull every document you have related to my father's assets. Titles, transfers, anything that's been filed in the last 2 years." There was a pause on his end. "That's a broad request. What exactly are you looking for?" I stepped out onto the deck, watching the early light stretch across the water. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I said. "But something tells me this isn't just about a beach house." By 9:40 a.m., Daniel had already started sending over the first batch of documents. That was one of the reasons I had kept him on retainer since 2021. He didn't waste time asking unnecessary questions when my tone made it clear something had shifted. The files came through in a secure folder: property records, trust filings, banking summaries tied to my father's known accounts. At first glance, everything looked normal. Clean. Predictable. Exactly the kind of paper trail you would expect from someone like Richard Caldwell, a man who had spent his entire career building infrastructure projects where precision wasn't optional. But I wasn't looking for obvious problems. I was looking for inconsistencies. I set my laptop on the kitchen island and started comparing signatures, dates, and transfer patterns the same way I would analyze a client portfolio. Slowly, methodically, without emotion. By noon, I had gone through about half of what Daniel sent, and nothing stood out in a way that justified the feeling sitting in my chest. I didn't panic. It wasn't even anger. It was recognition. The same quiet signal I'd learned to trust in business when something didn't add up, even if I couldn't yet prove it. At 12:17 p.m., another email came through. Subject line: "You need to see this." I opened the attachment. It was a transfer deed filed in Los Angeles County dated August 14, 2024. The document conveyed partial ownership of a commercial property in Pasadena, valued at approximately $1.3 million, from my father to an entity I didn't recognize, Mercer Holdings Group LLC. I sat back slightly, letting the name settle. Mercer. Diane's maiden name. I pulled up the California Secretary of State Business Registry and typed it in. Mercer Holdings Group LLC had been registered in March 2023. Sole member, Diane L. Mercer. No partners. No additional officers. No indication my father had any formal connection to it. My eyes moved back to the deed. At the bottom, where the signature should have been unquestionable, was my father's name. Richard Caldwell. Except it didn't look right. It wasn't an obvious difference. If you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it entirely. But I had seen my father sign his name hundreds of times growing up. Birthday cards, permission slips, documents spread across the dining room table. His signature had a rhythm to it. A consistency that came from decades of repetition. This version didn't have that rhythm. The R was slightly tighter. The spacing between the first and last name was compressed. And the pressure pattern, something most people would never notice, felt uneven, like someone had slowed down halfway through writing it. I took a screenshot and opened a separate window, pulling up older documents Daniel had included: my father's will, a notarized affidavit from 2022, and a property tax form. I placed them side by side. The difference was subtle. But it was there. I called Daniel. "Tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing," I said as soon as he picked up. "I was waiting for you to call," he replied. "That signature didn't sit right with me either." "Can we prove it?" "Not yet," he said. "But I can bring in someone who can." I walked out onto the deck again, the ocean stretching endlessly in front of me. It was calm. Deceptively calm. "Do it," I said. "And Daniel, I need everything. Not just this property. Any transfers. Any accounts. Anything that has changed in the last 2 years. There was a brief pause. Ethan, if this goes where I think it might, we're not talking about a misunderstanding. I know, I said. That's why I'm calling you now instead of later. We hung up, and for a few minutes, I just stood there, letting the weight of what I was looking at settle into something more solid. This wasn't about Diane overstepping or being entitled. This wasn't about her assuming she could walk into my house and take control. This was about a pattern. And if there was one forged document, there were probably more. At 2:30 p.m., I got another call. This time, from my father. Diane says we should leave early tomorrow morning, he said. Beat the traffic. I leaned against the railing, keeping my voice steady. That's fine. She mentioned something about staying for a few weeks, he added, almost casually. I didn't realize that was the plan. It wasn't, I said. But we'll sort it out when you get here. He hesitated. Ethan, everything okay? There was a time when I would have softened the truth. When I would have said yes, just to avoid making things uncomfortable. But that instinct didn't feel useful anymore. I'm working through something, I said. I'll explain when I have all the pieces. Another pause. Longer this time. All right, he said finally. We'll talk tomorrow. When the call ended, I checked the time. 3:12 p.m. Less than 24 hours before they arrived. I went back inside and reopened the documents. If Diane had been transferring assets into an LLC under her name, she wasn't doing it randomly. There would be a structure to it. A sequence. People like her didn't act without a plan. By early evening, Daniel called back. I've scheduled a preliminary review with a forensic document examiner, he said. Name is Laura Whitman. Former federal analyst. She's testified in over 50 cases involving signature fraud and financial manipulation. When can she look at it? She already has, he said. I sent her the files as soon as we got off the phone. I straightened slightly. And? She's not willing to issue a formal opinion yet, he said carefully. But her initial assessment is that the signature on that deed shows characteristics consistent with simulated forgery. The words landed exactly the way I expected them to. Not with shock. With confirmation. All right, I said. What do you need from me to make it official? Time, Daniel replied. And more samples. The stronger the comparison set, the harder it is for anyone to dispute her conclusion. I'll get them, I said. What else? There's something else, he added. While I was pulling the property records, I flagged a set of transactions tied to your father's retirement account. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. What kind of transactions? Withdrawals, he said. Multiple. Spread out over the last 12 months. Totaling just under $400,000. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was organizing the information as it came in. Where did the money go? I asked. That's what I'm working on, he said. The initial routing points to an account at Pacific Crest Bank under the name D. Mercer. There it was. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A system. Daniel, I said quietly, how bad is this? He didn't answer immediately. I could hear papers shifting on his end, the faint sound of a keyboard. Best case, he said finally, she's been moving money without proper authorization. And worst case? Forgery. Financial exploitation. Potential identity fraud. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. Okay, I said. Then we treat it like the worst case until proven otherwise. When the call ended, the house felt different. It wasn't just a place I had bought anymore. It was a line. A boundary. And Diane had already crossed it before she even set foot inside. I walked through each room that evening with a level of awareness I hadn't had before. The master bedroom. The ocean-facing guest suites. The open living space that she had already decided would belong to her. I could almost hear her voice in my head, explaining to her friends how she had helped make this happen, the same way she had rewritten every other part of our family story over the years. But this time, the narrative wasn't hers to control. At 10:08 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A message from Diane. Make sure the house is stocked. We'll have guests over this weekend. I don't want it looking unfinished. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, reading it twice. Then I typed back. Everything will be ready. I set the phone down and turned off the lights in the living room, leaving only the soft glow from the deck outside. The ocean was louder at night. Or maybe everything else was just quiet enough to let it through. They would be here in less than 12 hours. And by the time they left, nothing in their world, or mine, was going to look the same. They arrived at 10:06 a.m. the next morning, right on schedule, in a black Range Rover that looked like it had been packed with the assumption of permanence, not a weekend visit. I watched from the upper balcony as the car pulled into the driveway, sunlight reflecting off the windshield in a way that made it difficult to see who was inside, but I didn't need to guess. I already knew how this would unfold. Diane stepped out first. Large sunglasses, tailored white blazer, hair pulled back with the kind of precision that suggested she had already rehearsed this entrance in her head. She paused for a moment beside the car, scanning the house from top to bottom like someone evaluating a property they were about to acquire, not visit. Finally, she said, loud enough for the word to carry up to where I was standing. My father got out next, slower, less certain. He held the door for a second longer than necessary, like he wasn't quite ready to step into whatever this moment was going to become. His eyes found mine on the balcony, and for a brief second, there was something there, uncertainty, maybe even apology, but it passed quickly. Then Tyler climbed out of the back seat, sunglasses on, phone already in his hand, filming something as he turned in a slow circle. This place is insane, he said, not to me, not to anyone in particular, just to the camera. I took a breath, steady and controlled, and walked downstairs. By the time I reached the front door, Diane was already halfway up the steps. She didn't wait for me to open it. She pushed it inward like she belonged there. Ethan, she said, stepping inside and glancing around the living room. You did well. There was no warmth in it. No pride. Just an assessment. Good morning, I said. My father followed her in, offering a small nod. It's beautiful, he said, looking out toward the ocean through the glass walls. Tyler walked straight past both of us, heading toward the deck. I'm taking the room with the best view, he called out, as if that decision had already been made. Diane set her handbag down on the kitchen island and turned toward me. We'll take the master, she said. It's the only one that makes sense. It wasn't phrased as a request. I met her gaze, calm, measured. We'll talk about the rooms, I said. Let's get settled first. She tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of irritation crossing her expression, but it disappeared just as quickly. Of course, she said. No need to overcomplicate things. Within 30 minutes, the house started shifting. Not physically. Not yet. But in the way space was being claimed without permission. Tyler had already opened 2 doors upstairs, leaving one of them wide open with his suitcase halfway unpacked on the bed. Diane moved through the kitchen, opening cabinets, checking appliances, making small comments under her breath about what needed to be replaced, adjusted, improved. This lighting is a bit harsh in the evenings, she said, glancing up at the fixtures. We'll fix that. We'll. My father stood near the edge of the living room, hands in his pockets, watching it all unfold with the same quiet distance I had grown used to over the years. He wasn't participating, but he wasn't stopping it either. At 11:14 a.m., Diane walked into the master bedroom. I followed a few seconds later. She was already standing near the window, looking out at the ocean like she had been there 100 times before. Yes, she said softly. This is the one. That's my room, I said. She didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her expression was calm, almost patient, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. Ethan, it's the largest room in the house. It's practical. Practical for who? For your father and me, she said. We're not here for a night. We need to be comfortable. There it was again. Not visiting. Staying. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my tone even. How long are you planning to be here? As long as it makes sense, she replied. The city has been exhausting, and this, she gestured toward the ocean, is exactly what we need right now. What we need. I watched her for a moment, studying the way she spoke, the way she framed everything as if the conclusion had already been agreed upon somewhere I hadn't been present for. And what do you think I need? I asked. She smiled slightly. Not warmly. Strategically. You need to stop being so defensive, she said. This is your family. I let that sit between us for a second. Then I nodded once. All right, I said. Let's do this your way. She seemed satisfied with that. By noon, my belongings from the master bedroom had been moved. Not by me. Two movers Diane had apparently arranged in advance arrived with no introduction and no hesitation. They worked efficiently, quietly, transferring my clothes, my personal items, everything, into one of the smaller rooms down the hall. I didn't stop them. I watched. Every step. Every box. Every decision. Because at that point, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing. At 1:30 p.m., Diane had already started making calls. Dinner tonight, she said into her phone as she stood on the deck. Just a small group. 5 couples. I want them to see the place while it still feels fresh. I leaned against the railing a few feet away, listening without interrupting. Yes, Malibu, she continued. We'll send the address. It's ours now. Ours. Not once did she correct herself. Not once did she acknowledge that she was standing in a house she didn't own. My father came out a few minutes later, joining me at the far end of the deck. He kept his voice low. I didn't know she was planning all this, he said. I know, I replied. He hesitated. I thought it was just a weekend. It was, I said. For me. He looked out at the water, his expression tightening slightly. Ethan, if this is too much. It is, I said, cutting him off gently. But that's not the point anymore. He turned toward me. Then what is? I met his eyes, holding the moment just long enough for him to understand that something had changed, even if he didn't yet know what. The point, I said, is that we're going to let this play out. That evening, the house was filled with people. 5 couples, exactly as Diane had planned. Well-dressed, polished, the kind of crowd that moved easily through spaces like this because they were used to them. Diane greeted each of them at the door, her voice warm, her posture relaxed, every detail of her performance calibrated to perfection. Welcome, she said, guiding them inside. We're so excited to finally have a place like this. I stood in the kitchen, pouring drinks, watching the narrative unfold in real time. This was always Richard's dream, she told one couple as she gestured toward the ocean. I just helped make it happen. No one questioned it. No one looked at me. At one point, a man in a navy suit approached me, glass in hand. Beautiful home, he said. You must be proud of your parents. I smiled slightly. Something like that. Diane's voice carried from the living room. Ethan works in finance, she said dismissively. He's between things right now. Taking time to figure out his next step. I didn't correct her. I let the moment pass exactly the way she intended it to. Because every assumption she made, every statement she delivered, every lie she layered into the evening was building something she couldn't see yet. And I needed her to keep building it. By 9:42 p.m., the guests began to leave. Compliments. Handshakes. Promises to visit again. Diane stood at the door, smiling, thanking them, owning a story that wasn't hers. When the last car pulled out of the driveway, the house fell quiet again. She turned toward me, her expression shifting almost instantly from public charm to private control. "We should talk about a few upgrades," she said. "If we're going to be here long term, there are changes that need to be made." I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. "We'll talk about everything." Because at that point, I had already made one decision that mattered more than anything she could possibly plan. I was done waiting. And whatever she thought she was taking from me, she was about to lose something she hadn't even realized was at risk. The house settled into a rhythm over the next few days, but it wasn't mine anymore. Not in the way it had been that first night when everything felt quiet and intentional. Now it moved around Diane's schedule, her preferences, her voice carrying from room to room like she was directing something only she could see. By Monday morning, she had already replaced the dining chairs. Not all of them. Just enough to make a point. They didn't match the tone, she said when I noticed the delivery boxes stacked near the garage. "This space needs cohesion." The invoice was on the kitchen counter. $9,800. Addressed to me. No conversation. No request. Just a handwritten note in the corner. "Take care of this. D." I picked it up, read it once, and set it back down exactly where she had left it. "I'll handle it," I said when she walked in a few minutes later. She smiled, satisfied. "I knew you would." That was the thing about Diane. She didn't push aggressively. She assumed compliance and built her behavior around the expectation that no one would challenge it. And for 15 years, no one had. That afternoon, I drove into Santa Monica and met Daniel Reeves at his office. It was a glass-walled suite on the 5th floor overlooking Wilshire, clean, minimal, designed for focus. He already had the documents laid out when I walked in. "Laura's preliminary report came in this morning," he said, sliding a folder toward me. I opened it. Forensic analysis. Signature comparison. Pressure mapping. Stroke sequencing. Her conclusion was precise. The signature on the August 14 transfer deed shows multiple indicators consistent with simulated forgery. The variations in line quality, hesitation marks, and pen pressure strongly suggest the signature was not executed naturally by the purported signer. I closed the folder slowly. "How solid is this?" I asked. "Strong," Daniel said. "But not enough on its own to move forward legally. We need a pattern. More documents. More proof." I nodded. "And the retirement account?" He tapped another file. "Worse than we thought." I opened it. Statements. Withdrawals. Routing details. For separate transactions over the past year. $95,000. $110,000. $80,000. $105,000. Total, $390,000. Each one transferred into an account at Pacific Crest Bank under Diane's name. No authorization forms. No documented approval. "Does my father know?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "There's no indication he does." I leaned back slightly, processing it. This wasn't opportunistic. It was systematic. "What about commercial property?" I asked. "There's more," he said. He pulled out another document. A second transfer. February 2025. Smaller asset this time. Around $420,000. Same pattern. Same LLC. Same signature. I exhaled slowly. "How far does this go?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. "I'm still digging," he said. But Ethan, this isn't just financial mismanagement. This is exposure. Legal exposure. If we confirm intent, we're looking at multiple felonies. I looked down at the documents again, then backed up at him. Good, I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Good. Yes, I said. Because if we're going to do this, we're not doing it halfway. There was a brief silence in the room. Then Daniel nodded once. All right, he said. Then we do it right. On my way back to Malibu, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't take any calls. I just drove, letting everything align into something clearer. This wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about timing. When I pulled into the driveway, Diane was on the deck with two women I didn't recognize. Wine glasses in hand. Light laughter. Controlled ease. She saw me and waved me over. Ethan, come meet Jessica and Lauren, she said. They're part of the foundation board. Foundation. Another piece of the puzzle. I stepped onto the deck, offering a polite nod. Nice to meet you. Your mother has told us so much about this place, Jessica said, smiling. It's incredible. I didn't correct her use of the word mother. Thank you, I said. Diane placed a hand lightly on my arm. We're discussing a small charity event, she said. Something intimate. Maybe 50 people. In the house? I asked. Of course, she said. It's the perfect setting. I looked at her for a moment. Sounds like a great idea, I said. And I meant it. Because the more public she made this, the easier it would be to end it where it mattered most. That night, after everyone left, I went back through the house again. Room by room. Not to admire it. To map it. Every entry point. Every line of sight. Every space that could hold people, conversations, attention. If Diane wanted to turn this into a stage, I was going to let her. But I was going to decide how the story ended. At 10:26 p.m., my phone buzzed. Daniel. I've got something else, he said. I stepped out onto the deck, closing the door behind me. Go ahead. There's a credit line, he said. Opened 18 months ago under your father's name. My grip tightened slightly on the phone. Balance? $62,000, he said. Charges include travel, retail, personal services. All Diane? I asked. Every transaction points to her, he confirmed. I looked out at the ocean, the waves breaking steadily against the shore. How did she get approval? I asked. That's the problem, Daniel said. There's no clear authorization trail. Which means either your father signed off without understanding it. Or he didn't sign at all, I finished. Exactly. I nodded slowly. Daniel, I said, I want a full timeline. Every transfer. Every account. Every document. I want it organized, verified, and airtight. You're thinking of legal action, he said. I'm thinking about exposure, I replied. There was a pause. Public, he asked. Yes. Then you'll need more than documents, he said. You'll need context. Witnesses. Something that makes it undeniable. I smiled slightly. I'm working on that, I said. After the call ended, I stayed on the deck for a while longer. Inside, I could hear Diane moving through the house, her footsteps steady, confident, completely unaware of the structure forming around her. By Wednesday, the pattern was undeniable. Daniel had compiled enough evidence to outline a clear sequence of events. Property transfers. Retirement withdrawals. Credit usage. All tied back to Diane. All executed in a way that suggested control, not coincidence. And then, Thursday morning, I found something that changed the scale of everything. Diane had left her tablet on the kitchen counter. Unlocked. I wasn't looking for it. Not exactly. But when I saw the screen light up with a notification, I glanced at it. A browser tab was still open. How to add spouse to property deed California. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then I picked it up. Scrolling through the history didn't take long. Multiple searches. Variations of the same question. Legal requirements. Processing times. Documentation needed. She wasn't just planning to stay. She was planning to take ownership of my house. I set the tablet back down exactly where it had been and stepped away. That evening, I called Daniel again. She's preparing to transfer my property, I said. There was no surprise in his voice this time. Then we're on a clock, he said. I know. Do you want to move now? He asked. We have enough to file preliminary action. I thought about it for a moment. The documents. The evidence. The pattern. And then I thought about Diane standing in the living room, hosting events, telling people a story she believed was already true. No, I said finally. Not yet. Ethan. I want everything, I said. Not just enough to stop her. Enough to end it. There was a long pause. Then Daniel exhaled. All right, he said. Then we do this your way. After the call, I walked back inside. Diane was in the living room, flipping through fabric samples with a designer she had brought in without mentioning it to me. This one works better for the space, she was saying. Something lighter. More coastal. She glanced up when she saw me. Oh good, she said. You're back. We're making a few adjustments. I nodded. Of course, I said. Because at that point, every decision she made, every change she planned, every assumption she acted on was moving her closer to a moment she couldn't control. And I was going to make sure that when it came, it happened exactly where it would matter most. By Friday, the house didn't just feel occupied. It felt converted. Not into something better. Not into something more functional. Just something that reflected Diane more than it reflected me. New decor had started arriving in coordinated shipments, each one replacing something I had chosen with something she preferred. The living room now carried a softer, curated look. Neutral tones, layered textures, pieces that photographed well and, more importantly, impressed the kind of people she cared about impressing. Invoices followed every delivery. Always addressed to me. Always assumed paid. I didn't argue. I didn't question it. I paid them, just like she expected, because at that point, the cost wasn't financial. It was strategic. The more comfortable she became, the less careful she would be. And carelessness was exactly what I needed. Saturday afternoon, she hosted another gathering. Smaller than the first, but more intentional. This time, the guest list included people who mattered to her professionally. Board members, donors, a local real estate developer, and 2 attorneys I recognized from prior deals in Los Angeles. Not close contacts of mine, but familiar enough to know their reputations. I stood near the bar area, watching the room fill. Diane moved through the space with precision. Every gesture controlled, every conversation positioned. She wasn't just entertaining. She was reinforcing a narrative. This house gives us so much flexibility, she said to a group near the windows. We've been looking for a place like this for years. Again. I poured another drink, letting the moment pass without interruption. Because every time she said it, every time she layered ownership over something that wasn't hers, she was creating a record. Not on paper, but in perception. And perception mattered. At 7:18 p.m., I stepped outside to take a call. Daniel. I've got the full timeline, he said. I leaned against the railing, the sound of the ocean steady beneath his voice. Walk me through it. It starts earlier than we thought, he said. First irregular transaction dates back to late 2023. Smaller amounts. testing the process. I nodded slowly. Then it escalates, he continued. By mid-2024, she's confident. That's when the property transfer happens. The Pasadena asset. And after that? She gets more aggressive, he said. IRA withdrawals, credit line usage, secondary property transfer. All within a 12-month window. How clean is the evidence? I asked. Clean enough that I'm comfortable saying this isn't circumstantial anymore, he said. This is deliberate. I exhaled slowly. And the total? I asked. There was a brief pause. Across all confirmed assets and accounts, we're looking at approximately $1.87 million, he said. The number settled in quietly. Not shocking. Just final. All right, I said. What's the next step? That depends on you, Daniel replied. We can file immediately. Freeze accounts. Initiate legal action. Or we wait, I said. Yes, he said. But if we wait, we need to control the environment. I looked back through the glass doors into the living room. Diane was standing near the center of the room, mid-conversation, completely at ease. I'm already working on that, I said. He paused. What are you planning? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, something she won't see coming. When the call ended, I stayed outside for a moment longer, letting the air settle. Then I went back in. The night continued exactly as Diane intended. Conversations flowed, laughter carried, and by the time the last guest left around 10:30, the house had once again served its purpose. Validation. Reinforcement. Control. Diane closed the door behind the final guest and turned toward me, her expression shifting back to something more direct. That went well, she said. It did, I agreed. She nodded, satisfied. We'll do something larger next time, she added. Something that really establishes us here. I held her gaze for a second. Actually, I said, I was thinking the same thing. That caught her attention. Oh, she said. Yes, I continued. If we're going to do this properly, we should do it at scale. Something that brings in the right people. Not just socially, but professionally. She studied me for a moment, measuring. What did you have in mind? She asked. A formal event, I said. Structured. Well-planned. The kind of thing that gets attention. Her interest sharpened. Go on, she said. I know a few people who can help organize it, I added. Legal, business, media. If we do it right, it won't just be a gathering. It'll be a statement. There was a brief pause. Then she smiled. That's exactly what we need, she said. Of course it was. Because Diane had always been drawn to visibility. To recognition. To environments where perception could be shaped in real time. And I was offering her the biggest stage she'd ever had. The next morning, I called Daniel. I want to move forward with the event, I said. He didn't hesitate. Then we need to coordinate everything, he replied. Timeline, documentation, presentation. I'll handle the front end, I said. You handle the structure. And your father? He asked. I'll bring him in when it matters, I said. There was a pause. Ethan, once we do this, there's no going back, Daniel said. I know, I replied. And I meant it. Because this wasn't just about exposing Diane. It was about resetting something that had been misaligned for years. Something that had gone unchecked for far too long. Over the next 2 weeks, everything moved quietly. On the surface, nothing changed. Diane continued hosting, planning, adjusting the house to fit her vision. She talked about the upcoming event with increasing excitement, already imagining how it would position her within the community. Behind the scenes, Daniel and I built something else. Every document was verified. Every transaction cross-referenced. Every signature analyzed and supported by expert opinion. We brought in a second forensic examiner to confirm Laura's findings. We secured certified copies of all property records. We mapped the financial flow from start to finish. No gaps. No assumptions. No room for interpretation. At the same time, I reached out to a few key people. Not many. Just enough. A senior partner at a litigation firm I had worked with in the past. A financial auditor with a reputation for precision. And one journalist who understood how to handle information without distorting it. Carefully selected. Carefully timed. Diane never questioned any of it. From her perspective, everything was aligning perfectly. The house. The events. The growing attention. She had no reason to doubt the direction things were going. And that was exactly the point. By the time the event date was set, everything was ready. Not just for a gathering. For a conclusion. The night before the event, I stood alone on the deck again, the same place where this had started. The ocean hadn't changed. The sound was the same. But everything else was different. Inside, Diane was reviewing details with a planner, her voice steady, confident, completely certain of what the next day would bring. I checked the time. 10:41 p.m. Less than 24 hours. I picked up my phone and sent one message. Everything is in place. Daniel responded almost immediately. Then tomorrow, we finish it. I set the phone down and looked out at the horizon one last time before going inside. Because by this point, the outcome wasn't a question anymore. It was just a matter of timing. And Diane had no idea she had already walked exactly where I needed her to be. The morning of the event arrived without urgency. That was the first thing I noticed. No chaos. No last-minute panic. Just a quiet, controlled build-up that mirrored everything else Diane had done since stepping into the house. By 8:15 a.m., the catering team was already setting up in the kitchen. Rentals were being delivered with precise timing. Tables, glassware, lighting, all placed exactly where the planner directed, each detail reinforcing the kind of environment Diane thrived in. I moved through it without drawing attention. Not as a host. Not as an organizer. Just present. Observing. By 10:30 a.m., Diane came downstairs dressed but not yet fully prepared. Hair done, makeup half finished, phone in hand as she reviewed confirmations. "This needs to feel seamless," she said to the planner. "No delays. No confusion. I want everything to flow." "It will," the planner assured her. Diane turned slightly when she saw me. "You're cutting it close," she said. "People will start arriving in a few hours." "I'll be ready," I replied. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to read something beneath the surface, but there was nothing there for her to find. "Good," she said. "Today matters." It did. Just not in the way she thought. By noon, the house had transformed again. Not just visually, but structurally. The main living area had been rearranged to accommodate a larger group. Seating positioned to face a central focal point. A small stage area set near the far wall, subtle but intentional. Lighting adjusted to draw attention forward without overwhelming the space. Exactly what I had requested. Diane hadn't questioned it. She assumed it was part of the presentation. And in a way, it was. At 1:45 p.m., Daniel arrived. He didn't come through the front. He entered quietly through the side access, dressed in a dark suit, carrying a slim briefcase. He didn't greet anyone outside of a brief nod in my direction. "Everything's ready," he said under his breath as we stepped into the hallway. "Final confirmations?" I asked. "All documents verified. Statements certified. Reports signed," he replied. "We also have the affidavit prepared." I nodded once. "And the others?" I asked. They're here, he said. Arrived separately. I didn't need him to specify who. That part had been handled carefully. Good, I said. He paused for a second, studying me. You're calm, he said. I've had time, I replied. By 3:10 p.m., the first guests began to arrive. Not just Diane's usual circle. A broader mix. Professionals. Legal contacts. Financial figures. People who understood not just appearances, but implications. Diane greeted them at the door with the same polished confidence she always used, completely unaware of the shift in the room. Because there was one. Subtle. But present. Conversations were still warm, but more measured. Observations carried a slightly sharper edge. The kind of environment where people weren't just socializing, they were paying attention. At 4 p.m., the house was full. Close to 80 people. Exactly the scale she wanted. Exactly the scale I needed. I stood near the edge of the room, watching as Diane moved through the crowd. She was in control. Or at least, she believed she was. Her posture, her tone, the way she directed attention, it was all consistent with someone who had spent years managing perception without interruption. My father arrived at 4:12 p.m. He entered quietly, alone. No announcement. No attention. His eyes found mine almost immediately, and I gave him a small nod. Nothing more. He moved to the side of the room, observing the same way I was. He didn't speak to Diane. She didn't notice. At 4:30 p.m., the planner approached Diane and said something quietly. Diane nodded, then tapped her glass lightly to draw attention. Everyone, she said, smiling as the room gradually settled. If I could have just a moment. The conversation softened, then stopped. All eyes shifted toward her. This has been a long time coming, she continued. Finding a place like this, building something meaningful around it, it doesn't happen overnight. She paused, letting the room settle into her words. But when it does, it's worth celebrating. Not just the space, but what it represents. Growth. Opportunity. Community. She was good. Very good. Every word placed exactly where it needed to be. And I want to thank all of you for being part of that, she said. Because none of this would mean anything without the people who support it. A few nods. Quiet agreement. Then she turned slightly. Ethan, she said, gesturing toward me. Why don't you come up and say a few words? There it was. The moment she thought she was giving me. I stepped forward. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just deliberate. The room shifted again as I moved toward the front. Conversations fully stopped now. Attention sharpened. I reached the center, took the glass from the nearby table, and set it aside without using it. No need to tap for silence. It was already there. I looked around the room slowly, making eye contact with a few people, letting the moment breathe. Then I spoke. Thank you all for coming, I said. I know many of you were invited here under a certain understanding of what this event represents. I paused briefly. And I think it's important that we take a moment to clarify that. Diane's expression didn't change immediately. But something in the room did. Subtle. But undeniable. I continued. This house was purchased earlier this year, I said. Privately. Without outside funding. Without partnership. A few heads turned slightly. It was not a shared investment, I added. And it was not acquired as part of any joint initiative. Now the shift was visible. Small movements. Glances exchanged. Attention tightening. I turned slightly, looking toward Diane. For the past several weeks, I said, there have been a number of assumptions made about ownership, control, and intent. Her smile held. But it didn't reach her eyes anymore. And today, I continued, I think it's time we address those assumptions directly. I reached for the folder Daniel had placed discreetly on the nearby table. The room was completely still now. Not quiet. Focused. I opened it. And for the first time that afternoon, Diane didn't look certain anymore. I opened the folder slowly, not for effect, but because moments like this don't benefit from rushing. Inside were the documents Daniel and I had spent weeks assembling. Verified. Cross-referenced. Impossible to dismiss. I looked back up at the room. I'm not going to take much of your time, I said. But I am going to be very clear. I lifted the first document. In August of last year, a commercial property in Pasadena was transferred out of my father's name into an entity called Mercer Holdings Group LLC. A screen behind me lit up. Daniel had arranged that quietly, seamlessly, just like everything else. The deed appeared. Clean. Official. With a signature at the bottom. My father's name is on this document, I said. But the signature is not his. A murmur moved through the room, low and controlled, the sound of people recalibrating what they thought they understood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. This analysis was conducted by a certified forensic document examiner, I continued. Her conclusion is that the signature shows multiple indicators of simulated forgery. I stepped slightly to the side, allowing the comparison to display. 2 signatures. One real. One not. The difference, once seen, couldn't be unseen. I reached for the next set of documents. Over the past 12 months, I said, 4 withdrawals totaling $390,000 were made from my father's retirement account. The screen changed. Bank statements. Dates. Amounts. Those funds were transferred into an account registered under Diane Mercer's name. The room didn't react loudly. But it reacted. Chairs shifting. Glasses set down. The quiet tension of people realizing they were no longer at a social event. I didn't stop. A credit line was also opened using my father's information, I said. Current balance, $62,000. Charges include travel, retail purchases, and personal services. Another slide. Another set of numbers. And a second property transfer earlier this year, I added. Following the same pattern. I placed the documents back on the table. The total amount diverted from my father's assets, I said, is approximately $1.87 million. The number settled into the room like weight. I turned toward my father. He was already standing. He didn't move forward immediately. He just stood there for a second, looking at the screen, then at Diane. I did not authorize any of these transactions, he said. His voice wasn't loud. But it carried. I did not sign those documents, he continued. And I had no knowledge of those accounts. Diane stepped forward then. Finally. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice controlled but sharper now. You're taking documents out of context and turning them into something they're not. She looked around the room, searching for alignment, for support. This is a family matter, she added. It should never have been brought here. I met her gaze. It became more than a family matter when it crossed into fraud, I said. Her expression tightened. You don't understand how finances work at this level, she said. There are complexities. There are, I agreed. Which is why everything you're seeing has been independently verified. I nodded slightly toward Daniel. He stepped forward just enough to be visible. Every document presented has been reviewed, certified, and prepared for legal filing, he said calmly. That was the moment the room shifted fully. Not socially. Professionally. Because now it wasn't just a claim. It was a case. Diane's composure cracked, just slightly. You set this up, she said, looking at me. This entire thing was planned. Yes, I said. No hesitation. No apology. I gave you the space to act exactly the way you chose to, I continued. And I documented it. Silence. Not empty. Final. At the edge of the room, one of the attorneys who had attended stepped forward slightly, his posture shifting from guest to observer. Another person took out their phone, not to record, but to process. Diane looked around again. This time, no one met her eyes. My father walked forward then, stopping a few feet from her. I trusted you, he said. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter. And heavier. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because there wasn't anything left to say. Not here. Not in this room. I stepped back slightly, giving space to what needed to happen next. This isn't the end of a conversation, I said to the room. It's the beginning of a process. I closed the folder. The appropriate actions will be taken through the proper channels. No theatrics. No escalation. Just finality. Diane didn't argue again. She picked up her bag slowly, her movements no longer controlled, no longer precise. She walked toward the door without looking at anyone. The sound of her heels against the floor echoed more than it should have. And when the door closed behind her, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt finished. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after she left. Then the tension released. Not into applause. Not into conversation. Just into understanding. People began to move again, but differently now. Conversations were quieter, more focused. A few approached Daniel. Others nodded toward me, not with approval, but with recognition. Respect. My father stood beside me. For the first time in years, there was no distance in it. We didn't say anything right away. We didn't need to. After a few minutes, the room began to clear. Not abruptly. Naturally. The way things end when there's nothing left to add. By 7:15 p.m., the house was quiet again. The same space. But not the same atmosphere. I stepped out onto the deck, the ocean stretching out in front of me exactly the way it had the first night I arrived. My father joined me a moment later. He exhaled slowly. I should have seen it, he said. I shook my head. You see things when you're ready to, I replied. He nodded once. Then after a pause, what happens now? Now, I said, we move forward. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something uncertain. It felt like a decision. If you made it this far, subscribe to Women Reddit Stories for more stories like this. And if you've ever had to stand your ground when no one else would, drop a comment, I'd really like to hear it. The ocean didn't change. The house didn't change. But the story did. And this time, it ended exactly where it should have.